Lieutenant Rachel Hayes had always lived on the edge of control. Ever since her first flight simulator session at the academy, instructors had noticed a restless brilliance in her eyes, a combination of curiosity, intuition, and a daring streak that often made others uncomfortable. Unlike most pilots, she did not simply follow manuals or drill exercises. She studied them, absorbed them, then imagined every possible variation, every possible outcome if something went wrong. In the air, this translated into movements that seemed reckless to outsiders. Sharp banking turns that skirted stall speed, rapid descents that defied expectation, and climbed so steep that even seasoned instructors held their breath. For Rachel, flight was more than a skill. It was an extension of her mind. She understood air currents in a way textbooks could never teach. Her instincts had saved her more than once during training accidents, but every victory was tempered by scolding remarks from superiors who feared her unpredictable methods. Discipline and regulation were the lifeblood of the military. Yet Rachel's talent often collided with protocol. She knew her maneuvers were precise, calculated, and effective, but to some, they were chaos masquerading as control. The grounding incident had started as routine training. The squadron had been tasked with practicing a series of evasive maneuvers, intended to simulate hostile conditions over mountainous terrain. The exercise was straightforward in theory. Approach, identify the target, execute evasive patterns, and exit safely. In practice, the mountains were unforgiving, with sudden wind shears and narrow passes that demanded split-second decisions. Rachel had flown the route a dozen times mentally, memorizing every ridge, every twist of the valley below. On the day of the exercise, she pushed her aircraft to its limits. She dove into a narrow canyon at a speed that had her instructor shouting warnings over the comms, banking sharply to avoid jagged cliffs while maintaining visual on her simulated targets. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with exhilaration. She was alive in a way that no briefing or classroom lecture could ever replicate. But her daring earned the wrong kind of attention. The lead instructor radioed a formal complaint. "Lieutenant Hayes, that was beyond acceptable limits. Stand down immediately." By the time she returned to base, the decision had already been made. Rachel was grounded indefinitely. The paperwork arrived that afternoon, cold and bureaucratic. Lieutenant Hayes is prohibited from flight activities pending review of recent risk violations. It was phrased in official language, neutral in tone, but for Rachel, it stung like a personal rebuke. She had risked nothing that was unnecessary, yet her abilities, honed over years of study and experience, were dismissed as reckless. The officers in charge of the grounding were methodical in their reasoning. They cited precedent, training guidelines, and the potential liabilities involved. To them, it was a simple matter of risk management. To Rachel, it felt like a cage. Her aircraft sat idle in the hangar, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a silent reminder of her restraint. Pilots who had once respected her now whispered behind her back. Some were envious, some genuinely concerned for her safety. None could deny her talent, but the stigma of too risky clung like a shadow. Rachel wandered the base that afternoon, observing others preparing for missions she could not join. She watched Lieutenant Harper, a competent but cautious pilot, checking instruments and reviewing flight plans in a meticulous, deliberate way. Harper's movements were precise, predictable, and safe. Rachel knew that if they had faced unexpected turbulence or an ambush, Harper might hesitate. The contrast was frustrating. Skill alone was not enough to convince some people. Adherence to the rules often outweighed ingenuity in the military hierarchy. She sought solace in the small pilot lounge, a space adorned with photographs of squadron members mid-flight, their faces frozen in determined concentration. Rachel poured herself a cup of coffee, staring at the image of a past squadron hero, Captain Mitchell, who had executed daring maneuvers during a reconnaissance mission that saved dozens of lives. Mitchell had taken calculated risks, just like her, yet history seemed forgotten by the very system she now served. She imagined herself in that same heroic light, but the current reality was frustratingly mundane. Grounded, sidelined, ignored. Her thoughts drifted to her family, long accustomed to her fearless nature. Her father, a retired Air Force pilot, had once warned her, "Rules keep you alive, Rachel, but instincts keep you useful." At the time, she had nodded politely, unaware of the deep truth in his words. Now, confined to paperwork and base duties, she understood it intimately. Rules were necessary, but they could never measure intuition or courage. The next mission might demand more than adherence. It might demand brilliance, the kind she had cultivated her entire life. As the day wore on, Rachel began to channel her frustration into preparation. She could not fly officially, but she could study, analyze, and anticipate. She reviewed reconnaissance reports, memorized patrol routes, and scrutinized topographical maps of potential conflict zones. Each piece of information was a puzzle she could solve mentally, honing her skills even without touching the controls. Fellow pilots noticed her intensity, some skeptical, some quietly admiring. Even on the ground, Rachel refused to fade into complacency. By late afternoon, the base had quieted, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She walked toward her grounded aircraft, running a hand along the fuselage, feeling the vibrations through her fingers as if it were alive. "You and I both know we're not done," she whispered. The jet was her partner, her confidant, her extension. To see it idle, restricted by a piece of paper, ignited a fire in her that would not extinguish. She knew that her moment was coming. Rules might ground her, but they could not stop her instincts. Not when the stakes were real. Her reflection was interrupted by a distant commotion. A messenger, breathless and urgent, handed her an encrypted note. She opened it to find intelligence. Reports indicating a sudden escalation in a volatile region overseas, one that required immediate reconnaissance. The details were vague, the risk high, and the consequences immense. Her pulse quickened. Though she was grounded officially, her mind raced. She visualized the flight path, the terrain, the maneuvers she would execute. Every skill she had honed over years would be tested if the situation worsened. Rachel leaned back against the aircraft, letting her mind replay potential scenarios. She imagined enemy radar, anti-aircraft positions, sudden weather shifts, and her responses. In her mind's eye, she executed maneuvers so precise and daring that they blurred the line between risk and necessity. Her grounding felt temporary, almost irrelevant. True skill, she realized, did not wait for permission. It demanded action when the moment arose. Her time would come, and she would be ready. By nightfall, Rachel Hayes had made a silent vow. The grounding was merely a pause, a challenge, a test of patience and intellect. The moment when her instincts, daring and brilliance would matter most was approaching. And when it did, she would be ready to step into the cockpit, to push the limits, and to prove that the label of too risky was nothing compared to the lives she could save. For now, the hangar was quiet, a jet resting silently under dim lights. Rachel stared at it, a fire burning in her eyes. She was grounded, yes, but not defeated. The skies were waiting, and when they called her, she would answer faster, sharper, and braver than anyone could imagine. While Rachel Hayes paced the hangar, mentally preparing for her eventual return to flight, thousands of miles away, tension gripped a remote military outpost in a volatile region. Satellite images showed an unusual buildup of enemy forces along the border, combined with reports of intelligence intercepts hinting at imminent attacks. The outpost, a small but strategically significant location, was critical for regional stability. Any misstep could trigger chaos, costing countless lives and compromising national security. The responsibility for the upcoming reconnaissance mission rested squarely on the shoulders of two high-ranking generals, who had trained for this moment their entire careers. General Marcus Whitman and General Elaine Carrington were veterans of decades-long service, each possessing a reputation for calm decisiveness under fire. They had seen conflict unfold in diverse theaters, from desert campaigns to mountainous regions, and had honed their strategies through countless drills, simulations, and field operations. Yet even with their expertise, the situation now unfolding demanded precision beyond routine protocol. Satellite reconnaissance indicated that enemy movements were rapid, unpredictable, and potentially devastating. Any reconnaissance failure could compromise the entire operation. Their mission: to gather real-time intelligence on enemy troop positions and infrastructure, ensuring that their forces could preemptively counter any attack. Inside the general's command center, tension was palpable. Analysts pored over data feeds, comparing satellite imagery with intercepted communications. Every detail mattered: the location of armored units, supply depots, potential ambush points, and enemy radar coverage. Even minor miscalculations could spell disaster. Generals Whitman and Carrington stood over a holographic map, their eyes scanning layers of data, discussing potential routes and timing. They knew the terrain was challenging: rugged mountains, deep ravines, and narrow valleys. Satellite images could not capture wind patterns or sudden weather shifts that might affect flight. The situation demanded both courage and instinct, qualities that machines and maps alone could never provide. Back at the base in the United States, Rachel followed the escalating situation with mounting unease. Grounded as she was, she remained acutely aware of every update. Her fingers traced the terrain maps, memorizing ridges, valleys, and potential hazards. Though officially barred from operational duties, her mind refused to be idle. She ran simulations mentally, envisioning routes the generals might take, analyzing the risks, and predicting the enemy's response. Her grounding did not diminish her sense of responsibility. In fact, it sharpened it. She knew that when the situation reached its breaking point, skill alone could save lives, and she had skill in abundance. Meanwhile, the general's team prepared their reconnaissance flight. Their aircraft was equipped with advanced surveillance technology and defensive systems, but even sophisticated equipment could not replace human judgment. The mission required low-level flight over enemy-controlled territory, a maneuver that exposed them to anti-aircraft fire, patrols, and unpredictable weather. In the command center, Whitman emphasized caution, while Carrington highlighted the urgency. They had to balance risk and reward perfectly, knowing that a single error could compromise the operation. As the generals reviewed their flight plan, unexpected intelligence reached the command center. Enemy forces were advancing faster than anticipated. Supply convoys and armored units were shifting positions overnight, creating unpredictable gaps and choke points. Analysts suggested delaying the mission, but time was a luxury they did not possess. The generals debated options, weighing caution against the strategic importance of immediate action. Every moment was critical. Hesitation could allow the enemy to consolidate strength, endangering countless lives. The decision was made. They would proceed, aware of the high stakes. Rachel observed the situation unfold from afar. Even grounded, she felt a visceral connection to the mission. She recognized patterns that analysts overlooked, noticed likely enemy positions based on terrain familiarity, and anticipated hazards that no simulation could predict. Her mind raced. She mentally marked escape routes, contingency plans, and emergency landing zones. Every detail mattered. Though she could not participate officially, she could prepare herself to act if circumstances demanded. The tension on the other side of the world felt personal, almost immediate. Her instincts screamed that danger was closer than anyone realized. Hours passed as the general's aircraft took off under a dawn sky, flying low to evade radar detection. On board, the team monitored every movement, their eyes scanning terrain for signs of enemy activity. The reconnaissance route was complex, requiring careful navigation over steep ridges and narrow passes. The general's experience guided them through these challenges, but even seasoned pilots could not predict every hazard. High winds funneled through valleys, created turbulence, forcing rapid adjustments to altitude and trajectory. Despite their skill, the operation demanded constant vigilance, with no room for error. Suddenly, reports indicated unexpected movement along their route. Enemy reconnaissance units had detected activity near one of the valleys the generals planned to survey. The team had to decide quickly: alter the route and risk missing critical intelligence, or proceed and risk exposure. General Whitman consulted Carrington, weighing options under immense pressure. Decisions had to be made in seconds, and the stakes were enormous. One misstep could trigger an ambush or force an emergency landing in hostile territory. The tension was suffocating, each choice carrying the weight of countless lives. Back at her base, Rachel anticipated what would unfold. She could not intervene officially, yet she felt the need to prepare mentally for rapid response. She analyzed likely enemy positions, predicted the general's flight path, and noted potential escape zones. Her mind raced through what-if scenarios: engine failure, communication loss, mechanical malfunction, and hostile engagement. Each possibility demanded a precise, immediate solution. Though grounded, Rachel's expertise made her indispensable in her mind. If anything went wrong, her knowledge could become the difference between success and catastrophe. As the day progressed, the reconnaissance mission approached a critical juncture. The general's aircraft descended into a canyon to observe enemy positions, relying on stealth and precision. Every maneuver tested their judgment and nerve. The enemy was closer than expected, and satellite data proved incomplete. The general's instincts guided them through the treacherous terrain, but unforeseen hazards loomed: narrow ledges, sudden wind gusts, and potential ambushes. The tension was electric, a delicate balance between tactical brilliance and the chaos of the environment. Unbeknownst to the generals, their mission was about to escalate beyond expectation. Enemy forces, more agile and alert than intelligence had predicted, began maneuvering to intercept. What had seemed like a controlled reconnaissance run now teetered on the edge of disaster. The aircraft sensors detected unusual activity, a head movement that indicated hostile units in positions capable of cutting off retreat. Every choice mattered, every second was critical. The situation had evolved from a planned intelligence-gathering mission to a life-or-death scenario. Rachel, monitoring updates from her base as best she could, felt a tightening knot in her stomach. Her grounding seemed trivial in comparison to the lives now at risk. Though rules forbade her involvement, her instincts screamed that immediate action might be necessary. She reviewed contingency options: the fastest routes to intercept, safe extraction zones, and potential landing areas if the aircraft encountered mechanical issues. Each calculation was precise, informed by years of training and a deep understanding of both aircraft capabilities and enemy tactics. By mid-afternoon, the reconnaissance mission had entered hostile territory completely. The general's aircraft was isolated, surrounded by enemy activity that had not been anticipated. Every decision now carried extreme consequences. Back at her base, Rachel's fingers traced the flight path on a digital map, her mind racing with strategies, evasive maneuvers, and contingency plans. Though grounded, she was already envisioning herself in the cockpit, executing maneuvers that could save the generals from entrapment. The tension across continents was mirrored in Rachel's every thought. Rules, protocol, and formalities meant little in the face of imminent danger. Her grounding had temporarily removed her from action, but her expertise remained invaluable. Every muscle, every neuron, was alert to the unfolding crisis. She could see it clearly. Two generals, experienced and strategic, were heading into a situation that demanded quick thinking, extraordinary skill, and courage under fire. And she knew, with certainty, that she might be the only one capable of saving them if disaster struck. By evening, the reconnaissance mission reached the edge of enemy-controlled terrain. The tension was almost unbearable. Every radar blip, every movement in the valley below, carried enormous significance. Rachel, still grounded yet fully engaged mentally, prepared herself for the possibility that her moment to act could come. At any second, the stage was set for events that would test her skill, her instincts, and her courage in ways no training exercise ever could. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over distant ridges. In the quiet of her hangar, Rachel Hayes remained focused, knowing that when the call came, she would have to act swiftly and decisively. The groundwork she had laid, the maps memorized, the contingencies calculated, all pointed to a single truth. The coming hours would demand everything she had to offer. And when they did, she would answer the challenge with the daring and precision that had always defined her career. The sun had barely crested the jagged peaks when disaster struck. Generals Marcus Whitman and Elaine Carrington, flying low over hostile territory, felt the sudden jolt of impact. Anti-aircraft fire had found its mark. An unseen projectile tore through the fuselage of their reconnaissance aircraft, shattering instruments and damaging critical control systems. Alarms blared as sparks flickered across the dashboard. The pilot's training kicked in instantly. Whitman fought to stabilize the aircraft, while Carrington assessed structural damage and attempted to send a distress signal. The peaceful reconnaissance mission had transformed into a life-or-death struggle in a matter of seconds. The terrain below was unforgiving. Jagged cliffs jutted out from shadowed valleys. Narrow ravines sliced through the landscape, and thick forests masked enemy movements. Attempting to make an emergency landing was a perilous gamble. Every maneuver carried risk. Every second mattered. Despite decades of experience, the generals realized they were trapped between enemy forces and the unforgiving mountains, with only limited control of the aircraft. Communication to command was spotty at best, leaving them isolated, vulnerable, and exposed. Their training had prepared them for many contingencies, but not for a scenario this volatile. Back in the United States, Rachel Hayes was reviewing flight simulations when a secure line interrupted her thoughts. It was the sort of urgent, encrypted communication that only appeared during true emergencies. The message was brief but clear. Generals Whitman and Carrington distressed behind enemy lines. Immediate support required. Risk to lives critical. Rachel's heart leapt. She knew immediately that standard rescue operations would take too long. Time was the enemy. Her grounding, which had seemed like a minor inconvenience, now felt like an obstacle to action she could not ignore. She stared at the encrypted report, assessing the situation with rapid precision. The details were incomplete, intentionally. Minimal to prevent leaks, but enough to understand the severity. The general's aircraft was disabled. Enemy forces were converging on their location, and conventional rescue teams would face delays that could prove fatal. Protocol forbade her involvement. Orders explicitly grounded her. Yet instinct and skill cannot be measured by paperwork. Every scenario Rachel ran in her mind pointed to one conclusion: if anyone could extract the general safely, it was her. Rachel's decision was immediate. She would act unofficially, relying on her training, knowledge of terrain, and ability to anticipate enemy behavior. There was no time for hesitation. She pulled her laptop closer, overlaying satellite images with historical maps, calculating. the most efficient infiltration route. Every variable mattered: altitude, speed, fuel, weather patterns, enemy patrol paths, and likely ambush points. She ran through simulations mentally, visualizing each step, each evasive maneuver, each split-second decision that might save lives. Though grounded, her mind and instincts became the engine for the rescue. Meanwhile, the generals fought to maintain control of the crippled aircraft. Whitman executed sharp turns to avoid debris and unstable ridges, while Carrington attempted to manually reroute power to damaged systems. The plane's navigation system was partially offline, forcing them to rely on visual cues alone. They scanned the terrain desperately, calculating potential landing zones while avoiding open fields that might expose them to enemy observation. With every passing minute, the probability of survival decreased. Their training, experience, and teamwork were their only lifelines. The first sign that the enemy had located them came in the form of movement in the forests below. Armored units were maneuvering into positions to intercept the aircraft once it landed. Ground troops advanced cautiously, scanning the rugged landscape for signs of the general's presence. The situation had escalated far beyond reconnaissance. What had started as a strategic intelligence mission was now a fight for survival. Both generals realized that without immediate external intervention, the odds were bleak. At her base, Rachel made preparations for a rapid deployment. She could not officially take off. Her clearance had been revoked. Yet she had access to critical resources and a network of loyal support staff who understood her capabilities. She called on a small, trusted team, briefing them with urgency and precision. Every detail mattered: the fastest route into the enemy zone, timing to avoid patrols, extraction points, and contingency plans for unexpected obstacles. Her reckless reputation now became an invaluable asset. Her daring would be essential to saving lives. Rachel's team moved quickly, coordinating logistics without raising alarms. They prepped an aircraft with specialized equipment, advanced navigation systems, stealth technology, and supplies for a potential emergency landing in hostile terrain. Each component was meticulously checked and rechecked. Rachel mentally ran through the flight sequence, noting every ridge, valley, and potential hazard. Her grounding had not dulled her skills. If anything, it had sharpened her instincts. This was no longer a training exercise. This was real, and failure was not an option. Minutes felt like hours as the generals struggled to stabilize their aircraft. Whitman's hands gripped the controls with white-knuckled intensity, while Carrington manually engaged backup systems to prevent further mechanical failure. The sound of groaning metal filled the cockpit as their aircraft skidded through turbulent air currents. They realized that even if they survived the landing, the enemy was closing in, and extraction under such conditions would be nearly impossible. Every second, every maneuver, had consequences far beyond their immediate survival. It would determine whether lives were saved or lost. Rachel reviewed satellite feeds and historical reconnaissance data, predicting the enemy's likely response. Her strategy was simple but daring: infiltrate covertly, anticipate patrol routes, and position herself to extract the generals before enemy forces could intervene. The calculations required split-second judgment, yet she made them effortlessly. Every scenario was mentally simulated, every risk weighed. Her grounding felt irrelevant now. In the face of imminent danger, only skill and instinct mattered. Rachel Hayes was ready to act where bureaucracy had failed. The general situation reached critical intensity. A mechanical failure caused the aircraft to dip dangerously, close to a jagged cliffside. Whitman corrected just in time, but the stress of maneuvering at low altitude under fire pushed them to the brink. Carrington's voice cut through the alarms, calm but urgent. "We need extraction now. We can't make it out alone." Their eyes met, silently acknowledging that survival depended on external intervention. Unbeknownst to them, their lifeline was already mobilizing. Despite orders and protocol. Rachel received the latest status update via encrypted channel, coordinates, terrain data, and enemy movement patterns. It was now or never. She took a deep breath, imagining herself in the cockpit, running through maneuvers she had practiced for years. Every calculation was precise, every instinct sharpened. She signaled her small team, "We're moving. Lives depend on us. No mistakes." The gravity of the situation was overwhelming, yet for Rachel, it was the moment she had prepared for her entire career. Minutes later, she climbed into the specially prepped aircraft. The engine roared to life, vibrating through her seat, an extension of her own energy. As she taxied toward the runway, her mind replayed the mission in detail: infiltration points, enemy patrols, alternate routes, emergency maneuvers, and extraction strategies. Every variable had been accounted for, yet she knew that improvisation would be necessary. Plans rarely survive first contact with reality, and Rachel's strength lay in adapting under pressure. As she lifted off, Rachel felt a familiar thrill, the mixture of fear and exhilaration that only true flight could provide. She moved swiftly, yet cautiously, toward the last known coordinates of the generals. Radar and satellite feeds guided her, but her instincts were equally vital. Every ridge, every shadow, every gust of wind demanded her attention. This was no longer a simulation. Every decision carried real-world consequences. Lives hung in the balance, and Rachel Hayes would be their savior. By the time she approached the edge of enemy territory, she had mentally run the mission countless times. Her aircraft descended into stealth mode, hugging terrain contours to avoid detection. The mountains rose sharply, shadows masking her path. She knew that patience was critical. One misstep could alert enemy forces and doom the mission. Her focus was absolute, her nerves steady, her mind a perfect fusion of calculation and instinct. For the first time since her grounding, Rachel felt the freedom that flight had always given her, but this time the stakes were unimaginably high. Rachel Hayes stood in the dimly lit hangar, her eyes scanning the prepped aircraft with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every panel, every instrument, every bolt had been checked and rechecked. The plane was outfitted for a mission that demanded stealth, speed, and precision. Low radar visibility, reinforced fuselage, and modified landing gear for unpredictable terrain. Despite the official grounding that had sidelined her, she now commanded the operation unofficially, relying on a small, trusted team who understood both the stakes and the necessity of secrecy. The generals' lives depended on her, and there was no room for error. Her first task was to coordinate the team. She had handpicked a small group of specialists, loyal, competent, and discreet, each excelling in a unique skill vital to the operation. Lieutenant Jackson was an expert in navigation, capable of calculating trajectories and escape routes faster than any computer system could process. Sergeant Lopez was a tactical strategist, trained in counter-surveillance and enemy pattern prediction. And Sergeant Nguyen was a technical genius, responsible for equipping the aircraft with advanced communication systems and stealth technology. Together, they formed a covert unit ready to defy conventional restrictions in the name of saving lives. Rachel began by briefing the team, her voice calm but urgent. "The generals are trapped behind enemy lines," she said, pacing as maps and satellite images were projected on a nearby wall. "Their aircraft is damaged. Standard rescue operations will take too long. We're going in unofficially. Timing, precision, and adaptability are critical. Every maneuver counts. If we fail, their lives and potentially the success of the entire mission are lost." She moved her fingers across the projected maps, highlighting ridges, valleys, and potential enemy positions. Every detail was critical. The team absorbed it with silent intensity, recognizing the enormity of the task ahead. Next came the logistical phase. Rachel personally supervised the loading of specialized equipment onto the aircraft. Backup communication devices, emergency medical supplies, survival kits, and fuel reserves were meticulously packed. She ensured that stealth technology was fully functional. Radar suppression systems, silent propulsors, and thermal masking devices had to operate flawlessly to prevent detection. She knew that in enemy territory, even a minor oversight could result in catastrophic consequences. As she checked every system, Rachel's mind moved faster than her hands, calculating contingencies and planning alternative routes for every conceivable obstacle. Weather patterns were another critical factor. Rachel studied meteorological data for the region, analyzing wind currents, storm projections, and temperature variations. A sudden gust in a canyon, she knew, could destabilize the aircraft, while a shift in temperature could affect engine performance. She ran simulations mentally, testing her response to sudden changes in the environment, ensuring that she could make instantaneous decisions mid-flight. Her grounding had forced her to focus on preparation and strategy, sharpening skills that would now be indispensable. The team then conducted rehearsals of the mission's critical segments. Using a scaled replica of the terrain and projected maps, they simulated enemy movements, potential ambush points, and escape routes. Rachel insisted on running multiple scenarios, each with increasing levels of complexity and unpredictability. Plans rarely survive first contact with reality, she reminded her team, a wry smile crossing her face. Our strength is adaptability. Be ready to improvise, but trust the preparation. It's our safety net. The team nodded, recognizing that Rachel's daring reputation was matched by methodical planning and methodical foresight. Rachel also focused on psychological readiness. She held a brief session discussing stress management and split-second decision-making under extreme pressure. We're not just flying into hostile territory, she said, locking eyes with each member. We're saving lives. Fear is natural, but it cannot paralyze us. Trust each other, trust the plan, and trust yourself. Her tone was both reassuring and commanding, instilling confidence while emphasizing the gravity of the operation. Each team member understood that hesitation could result in fatal consequences. Fuel management was a meticulous process. The aircraft had been loaded with additional fuel reserves for extended loitering and emergency contingencies. Rachel calculated burn rates against anticipated maneuvers, factoring in weight, altitude, and potential evasive maneuvers. Even minor miscalculations could jeopardize the mission. She insisted on running calculations repeatedly until the numbers were precise. The team worked tirelessly, double-checking every variable, knowing that Rachel's reputation for precision meant no margin for error. Once the aircraft and team were ready, Rachel focused on navigation. She overlaid satellite imagery with historical reconnaissance maps, highlighting enemy positions, choke points, and natural hazards. Using this information, she developed multiple flight plans and alternative extraction points. Her experience allowed her to anticipate enemy patrols, predict likely engagement zones, and identify safe landing sites in unforgiving terrain. She memorized the routes, knowing that in the heat of the mission, split-second judgment might require deviation from the plan. The groundwork had to be impeccable. Communication protocols were equally critical. Rachel ensured that encrypted channels were tested and secure, with backups in place in case primary systems failed. Silent hand signals and pre-agreed visual cues were also established for situations where technology might be compromised. Every member of the team had memorized the signals, ensuring coordinated responses even under extreme duress. Rachel's attention to detail extended to the smallest components. Each cable, switch, and system had been tested and verified, leaving no room for malfunction. The night before the mission, Rachel conducted a final briefing. The team gathered around the projection of the operational map, each aware that the next day would test every skill, every ounce of courage, and every instinct. "The generals are depending on us," she said, her voice steady, "and we cannot fail. Remember, preparation is our ally, but adaptability is our weapon. Trust your training, trust each other, and trust yourself." The room fell silent as the gravity of the mission sank in. Each member of the team understood the stakes. They were about to enter enemy territory without official sanction, relying solely on skill, planning, and trust. As dawn approached, Rachel made one final inspection of the aircraft. She ran her hands along the fuselage, checking the integrity of each system one last time. The plane, gleaming under the hangar lights, seemed almost alive, a partner in the mission. She took a deep breath, absorbing the weight of responsibility and the urgency of the task ahead. Every calculation, every rehearsal, every contingency plan had led to this moment. Failure was not an option, and yet Rachel felt an exhilarating calm. She was ready. Finally, Rachel and her team boarded the aircraft. The engines hummed to life, a vibration that resonated through her very core. The hangar doors slowly opened, revealing the early morning light and the runway that led to danger. Each team member took their position, eyes focused, minds alert. Rachel assumed her place in the cockpit, hands on controls, heart steady. The mission was no longer theoretical, it was real, and success depended on every decision, every maneuver, and every ounce of courage the team possessed. With a final check of instruments, Rachel gave the signal. The aircraft taxied smoothly onto the runway, engines roaring with restrained power. She felt the familiar thrill of flight, combined with the weight of responsibility. Ahead lay mountains, enemy forces, and the trapped generals. Every moment demanded precision. Every action carried life or death consequences. Her grounding was now irrelevant. The mission had begun. As the plane lifted into the sky, Rachel scanned the horizon, visualizing the path ahead. The mountains stretched out below, shadowed valleys and jagged ridges, forming a labyrinth that only a skilled pilot could navigate. Enemy activity was unpredictable, weather conditions challenging, and the mission critical. Yet Rachel Hayes, once deemed too risky, now commanded the operation. Her preparation, planning, and daring would be tested in ways she had never faced before. Failure was unthinkable. Lives depended on her, and she would not falter. The moment Rachel's aircraft crossed the invisible threshold into enemy airspace, every heartbeat seemed to echo louder in the cockpit. A hush fell over the crew. Lieutenant Jackson monitored navigation systems with surgical focus, eyes darting between coordinates and real-time satellite feeds. Sergeant Lopez leaned forward, scanning radar pings for anomalies, while Nguyen quietly adjusted the stealth array, fine-tuning the thermal masking to avoid heat detection. Rachel's hands stayed, locked on the controls, her every movement deliberate, her breathing steady. This was the most dangerous flight of her life, and yet she felt utterly alive. The valley below was hostile territory. Dense forests cloaked the ground in shadow, concealing both friend and foe. Farther out, jagged mountains cut into the horizon, creating natural barriers, but also perfect hiding spots for enemy surveillance units. Rachel angled the aircraft lower, skimming the terrain with precision. "Altitude 90 meters, Jackson whispered. Rachel nodded without speaking, adjusting the throttle to maintain silent propulsion. Flying this low was dangerous. One miscalculated movement could tear them apart against a ridge, but it was the only way to remain invisible to long-range radar. 10 minutes into hostile skies, Nguyen stiffened. "Thermal sweep inbound," he whispered, pointing at the monitor. Enemy drones were scanning the valley with heat detection beams. If they picked up even a trace of the aircraft's exhaust, the entire mission would be compromised. Rachel didn't hesitate. She pulled the craft sharply left, gliding them into the shadow of a cliff face. A team held their breath as this thermal wave passed overhead. Seconds dragged on like minutes. Finally, the monitor cleared. "We're still ghosts," Nguyen muttered. Rachel smirked, but kept her focus. They had survived the first test. Lopez spoke next, his voice tight. "Enemy patrol convoy 3 clicks northeast. Ground vehicles, possible anti-air support." Rachel adjusted course again, skirting along a narrow canyon where radar shadows were deepest. The aircraft dipped low, skimming dangerously close to rock walls. Sparks flew as one wingtip grazed stone. Jackson winced, but said nothing. Rachel's control was unwavering, her instincts razor-sharp. This was what had gotten her grounded before her taste for maneuvers that defied regulations. But now those very maneuvers were keeping the team alive. After nearly an hour of evasive flying, the terrain began to flatten into a wide valley. On the far side, shrouded in fog and half-collapsed trees, lay the coordinates where the generals were last seen. The valley was eerily quiet, too quiet. Rachel's gut twisted. Silence here didn't mean safety. It meant the enemy had likely set a trap. She cut the engine to half power, letting the craft glide silently toward the ground. "Prepare for descent," she whispered. The aircraft touched down with a jolt, bouncing twice on the uneven soil before settling into concealment behind a thicket. The team moved quickly, securing the aircraft with camouflage nets that mimicked the surrounding terrain. Each soldier donned tactical gear, weapons checked and loaded. Rachel slung a compact rifle across her back, but kept her headset on, maintaining communication with Nguyen, who would stay behind to guard the plane and keep systems running. "Extraction clock starts now," she ordered. 2 hours max before. "We're compromised." Lopez and Jackson flanked her as they moved into the forest, every step deliberate, every sound amplified by the heavy silence. The forest swallowed them whole. Twisted branches hung low, and the air smelled of damp earth mixed with faint smoke. Jackson led them along a ridge line, cross-checking terrain against his digital map. "Coordinates are just beyond that ridge," he murmured. Rachel tightened, her grip on her weapon. Each step forward was heavier with tension. Suddenly, Lopez froze, raising a clenched fist. The group dropped into cover. Ahead, barely 30 meters away, 2 enemy scouts were patrolling, rifles slung lazily, but eyes sharp. Rachel signaled with her hand. Lopez mouthed, "Silent takedown." The maneuver was swift. Lopez moved like a shadow, circling wide before taking one guard down with a chokehold, dragging him silently into the brush. Rachel lunged at the second, striking behind his knees and pinning him with cold precision. She pressed the barrel of her rifle against his temple until his body went limp in surrender. Without a word, Lopez secured both men with restraints and concealed them beneath foliage. Rachel exhaled slowly. One mistake avoided, but countless more awaited. As they advanced, faint signals of distress crackled through their encrypted comms. Nguyen patched into the frequency. "I've picked up a weak SO matches the general's beacon," he whispered through static. Rachel's heart surged. They were close. She gestured for the team to accelerate, but stay low. Through the thick brush, the outlines of a downed transport helicopter emerged, its tail sheared off, rotor blades twisted like broken bones. Smoke rose faintly from the wreckage. Around it, crude enemy fortifications had been erected, a sign that the generals weren't alone. From their vantage point, Rachel spotted the 2 trapped generals. They were tied near the wreckage, guarded by 6 heavily armed soldiers. The generals looked exhausted but alive, their uniforms dirt-stained, faces hardened with defiance. Rachel crouched lower, calculating angles. A frontal assault would be suicide. They needed distraction, stealth, and precision. She leaned into Lopez. "Diversion?" she whispered. He nodded, pulling a timed flash device from his pack. Rachel laid out the plan quickly. Lopez would circle wide, planting the device to create chaos. Jackson would cover the generals, sprinting in once the guards were distracted. Rachel herself would neutralize the nearest threats. Timing was everything 1 second too early or too late, and it could all collapse. They exchanged nods. The mission that had seemed impossible was now seconds away from execution. Lopez disappeared into the trees, his figure vanishing like smoke. Rachel steadied her breathing, eyes locked on the guards. The seconds stretched, her pulse sinking with the silent count in her head. Then light exploded. A searing flash lit the valley, followed by a concussive thump that sent the guards stumbling. In panic, shouts filled the air. In that split second of chaos, Rachel moved. She sprinted forward, dropping one guard with a clean shot to the leg and slamming the butt of her rifle into another's jaw. Jackson dove toward the generals, cutting their restraints with practiced precision. The men staggered up, weak but determined. Lopez emerged from the chaos, firing controlled bursts to keep enemies pinned. Rachel covered their retreat, her reflexes sharp, her focus absolute. Bullets cracked through the trees, but she kept moving, shielding the generals with her own body. They broke free of the wreck site, diving into cover behind fallen logs. Rachel quickly checked the generals. "Can you move?" she barked. Both nodded through gritted teeth. Exhaustion lined their faces, but their resolve was unbroken. "Then we run," she ordered. Now. The forest erupted with shouts and gunfire as enemy reinforcements closed in. Rachel led the way, her team flanking the generals, bullets splintering trees around them. The extraction clock was ticking faster. Now every second meant a tightening noose. Ahead lay their hidden aircraft, salvation within reach, but only if they could survive the gauntlet between. The forest seemed alive with gunfire. Bullets tore through branches, splinters stinging Rachel's face as she led the group deeper into the valley. Every instinct screamed at her to run faster, but discipline forced her to balance speed with stealth. The generals stumbled behind her, their movements slowed by exhaustion and injury. Lopez and Jackson flanked them tightly, weapons raised, firing controlled bursts to keep the enemy at bay. It was a deadly dance. Move, cover, return fire, move again. Each step forward felt like defying gravity itself. Rachel's earpiece crackled. Multiple hostiles closing from the north. Nguyen warned from the aircraft. His voice was calm, but sharp. Drones are also circling. You've got maybe 15 minutes before they lock your position. Rachel grit her teeth. 15 minutes wasn't enough, not with wounded generals and swarming enemy patrols. Prep engines, she hissed back. We're bringing company. The team crashed through tangled undergrowth until the terrain dropped into a ravine. Rachel scanned quickly, too steep for the generals to climb safely under fire. Down the gully, she ordered. They half slid, half fell down the slope, rocks tumbling noisily around them. Enemy shouts echoed above, followed by the thud of grenades. Dirt and debris rained as explosions ripped the ridge. Rachel shielded one general with her body, feeling the shockwave rattle her bones. They survived only by seconds. At the base of the ravine, a shallow stream cut through the forest. Rachel gestured for silence, motioning them into the water. The cold bite slowed their pace, but the stream masked footprints and heat signatures. For 5 long minutes they waited, breaths ragged, every sound magnified. Overhead, a drone buzzed. Faintly, Rachel froze, pulling the group under a canopy of thick branches. The drone hovered, scanning. Her pulse hammered in her ears. At last it drifted on, fooled by the water's masking effect. She exhaled slowly, then pushed forward. Jackson glanced back at the generals. "They're fading," he whispered. One of the generals stumbled hard, collapsing against a rock. Rachel crouched beside him, her face taut with urgency. "On your feet, sir," she pressed. His lips were pale, his breaths shallow. But when he met her eyes, she saw steel beneath the exhaustion. He forced himself upright, leaning heavily. On Jackson, Rachel's chest tightened with respect. These men were leaders, trapped but unbroken, and now their survival depended entirely on her. Gunfire flared again, closer now. Enemy squads had split and were converging. Lopez dropped into cover, laying down suppressive fire. "They're hurting us," he shouted. Rachel scanned the terrain. Ahead, the forest narrowed into a bottleneck of jagged rocks, a kill zone if they kept moving straight. She made a split-second decision. "Left, up the ridge!" She barked. The path was brutal, sharp inclines, loose soil, but it gave them high ground. Lopez helped push one general upward, while Jackson supported the other. Rachel climbed last, firing blindly to keep enemies pinned below. When they reached the top, the view was grim. Smoke rose from multiple directions, where enemy flares had been lit. They were trapped in a tightening circle. "Nguyen," Rachel hissed into comms. "Status. Engines hot," came the reply. "But you've got hostiles triangulating on your location. You need a window, or you'll never make it back." Rachel wiped sweat from her brow, her mind racing. "Then we make our own window," she muttered. She scanned the valley, then spotted a ridge of loose shale above the enemy patrols below. If they could trigger a landslide, it might buy them precious minutes. She gestured to Lopez, pointing at the ridge. Understanding flashed in his eyes. He primed 2 grenades, arced them high. The detonations shook the hillside. Rocks cascaded. In a thunderous roar, burying the patrol beneath tons of rubble. Shouts turned to screams. For the first time in hours, silence returned. They pushed on. Time blurred into a haze of sweat, pain, and grit. Finally, Nguyen's voice cut through. 200 meters north. You'll see the marker." Rachel scanned the trees until she spotted a faint glimmer of light, a coded beacon Nguyen had set. Relief surged, but it was fragile. They weren't safe yet. As they neared the clearing, enemy fire erupted from both flanks. Tracers cut the air, forcing them into the dirt. Rachel cursed. The ambush was perfectly timed. The generals dove behind logs, Jackson firing back, Lopez barking curses. As he laid down suppressive rounds, "We can't push through like this," he yelled. Rachel's eyes darted, brain racing. Then she spotted a half-fallen pine balanced precariously on the ridge above the ambush site. She climbed to her knees, ignoring the bullets. "Cover me," she ordered. Without hesitation, Lopez and Jackson unleashed firepower to distract the enemy. Rachel sprinted up the incline, dodging gunfire, until she reached the pine. With a roar, she shoved her weight against it. The tree toppled, crashing down onto the enemy flank with bone-snapping force. Shouts turned into chaos. "Move!" Rachel screamed. The group bolted through the gap, bullets snapping at their heels. Ahead, the camouflaged aircraft shimmered into view like salvation. Nguyen stood at the ramp, weapon drawn, firing bursts to cover their approach. The generals staggered aboard first, pulled in by Nguyen's grip. Lopez and Jackson followed. Then Rachel leapt last, twisting mid-air to fire a final shot at their pursuers before slamming the ramp control. The engines roared. The aircraft surged upward, shaking as gunfire peppered its underside. Rachel fought her way to the cockpit, whipping the controls as the craft lurched. Enemy anti-air systems had locked on. Warning sirens wailed. Heat-seeking missiles streaked into the sky behind them. Rachel's hands flew over the controls, sweat dripping down her temple. She jinked left, diving low, then rolled hard right. The missiles overshot, exploding harmlessly in the distance. But more locks followed. The sky lit with hostile fire. Jackson stumbled into the cockpit, bruised but focused. Countermeasures armed, he barked. Rachel nodded. She yanked the aircraft into a gut-wrenching corkscrew. Flares spewed from the craft's belly, decoys streaking into the air. 2 missiles detonated against them, the shockwave rattling the fuselage, but sparing the team. The aircraft shot over the last ridge, breaking into open sky. Behind them, the valley burned with flares, tracers, and chaos. Ahead lay the uncertain safety of friendly airspace. Rachel exhaled hard, her knuckles white on the controls. "We're not clear yet," she muttered. The fight wasn't over, but they had clawed their way out of the gauntlet. For now, the generals lived. The aircraft clawed higher into the night sky, its engines howling in protest. Rachel's hands trembled on the controls, not from fear, but from the raw adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Every muscle in her body ached after hours of awe. Running and fighting, yet her focus sharpened like a blade. Behind her, the 2 generals slumped in their seats, faces pale with exhaustion, their survival now pinned entirely to her piloting skills. Nguyen's voice cut through the cockpit headset. Multiple radar locks, fast movers incoming. Rachel's eyes flicked to the threat display. 3 hostile fighter jets were already accelerating toward them from the east. Her gut twisted. They were too close to the border. Friendly air support wasn't an option. They were on their own. Jackson strapped into the co-pilot's seat, his jaw set tight. "Weapons?" he asked. "Limited," Nguyen answered grimly from the back. 1 missile rack and a few countermeasures. This bird wasn't built for dogfights. Rachel exhaled sharply. "Then we don't fight, we survive." She pushed the throttles forward, engines screaming as the aircraft surged ahead. Below, the valley rolled away, dark forests giving way to jagged mountains. The altimeter ticked. Upward as she climbed, hoping altitude would give her maneuvering room, the first missile streaked toward them, a white lance of death cutting across the darkness. Rachel's reflexes took over. She yanked the stick left and dove hard, stomach slamming against her harness. "Flares out," she barked. Jackson hit the release. Bright magnesium flares erupted behind them, 1 missile detonating harmlessly against the decoys. But the shockwave jolted the aircraft violently, rattling loose panels and sending alarms screaming. The generals gripped their seats as turbulence rocked the cabin. Lopez staggered forward, grabbing a handhold. "We can't take hits like that," he shouted. Rachel ignored him, eyes locked on the heads-up display. 2 more missiles locked. She dropped low, skimming treetops so close that branches scraped the belly. The ground blurred beneath them, dark and unforgiving. The pursuing jets swooped closer, their afterburners glowing like angry stars. "Rachel, they're hurting us." "South," Jackson growled. "I know," she snapped. Her brain raced. If she followed their lead, they'd be pushed deeper into enemy territory, where more fighters waited. But turning north toward friendly airspace meant cutting straight across their firing cones. It was suicide or genius. "Hold on," she muttered. She hauled the stick back, climbing steeply. The jet engines roared, vibrations shaking every rivet in the hull. Alarms screamed as missile locks painted them from all directions. "Rachel!" Lopez yelled. She rolled the aircraft into a knife-edge turn and cut power suddenly. The craft shuddered, leading speed in a gut-wrenching stall. The pursuing jets overshot, streaking past in confusion. Rachel slammed the throttles forward, reigniting. the engines, and dove behind them. For a brief, exhilarating moment, the hunter became the hunted. Jackson armed a single missile rack. "Target locked. Fire," Rachel ordered. The missile streaked forward, chasing one of the jets. The enemy pilot juked hard, but too late. The explosion lit the sky, shards of fire raining down. Cheers erupted from the cabin, but Rachel didn't celebrate. One down meant two left. The survivors swung back, angry hornets diving on their prey. Heavy gunfire stitched across the night sky. Tracers slashed past the canopy, too close for comfort. Rachel juked left, then right, every move calculated to keep them alive by seconds. Sweat soaked her gloves as she pushed the aircraft to its limits. Another missile warning blared. Rachel's breath caught. Countermeasures were nearly depleted. She forced herself calm. "Jackson, give me the last flares on my mark." "Copy." She dove toward a canyon carved between two mountain ridges. The enemy followed, confident, certain she had nowhere left to run. The radar lock screamed in her ears. At the last possible second, she barked, "Now!" Jackson hit the release. Flares burst behind them as Rachel pulled the aircraft into a near-vertical climb straight along a canyon wall. The missile, confused by heat signatures, detonated harmlessly against the rock face. The shockwave thundered through the canyon, disorienting the pursuing jets. Rachel didn't hesitate. She rolled the aircraft upside down, skimming the cliff. Face inverted, then leveled out into open sky. The maneuver was reckless, insane, but it worked. The enemy fighters overshot again, struggling to reacquire. Nguyen's voice was tense, but hopeful. "Orders 20 clicks. If we can make it." Their rules of engagement change. Rachel's lips pressed thin. 20 kilometers felt like a lifetime. The enemy regrouped quickly, diving in formation. This time, they didn't fire missiles. They were closing for guns. Streams of tracers cut the air, hammering the fuselage. Sparks sprayed from the right wing. Warning alarms wailed. "We've lost hydraulics on starboard." Jackson shouted. Rachel gritted her teeth. The controls grew heavy, sluggish. The aircraft shuddered with every maneuver, threatening to stall. Panic clawed at her chest, but she shoved it down. She couldn't think about failure. Not with lives on the line. The generals staggered forward, racing themselves against the cockpit wall. One of them, the older, gray-haired general, met Rachel's eyes. His voice was steady, resolute. "Whatever happens, Lieutenant, you've already saved us. But if you get us across that line, you'll save the mission too." Rachel nodded. Once, fire blazing in her chest. She refused to let them down. She pushed the engines to maximum, the aircraft screaming as it clawed for speed. The pursuing fighters closed relentlessly, their tracers chewing closer with every burst. At 10 kilometers, Rachel dove again, hugging the terrain, weaving between ridges to break radar lock. At 5 kilometers, the border radar began to ping friendly, systems finally detecting them. "Almost there," Jackson said through gritted teeth. At 2 kilometers, the enemy unleashed their last barrage. Tracers ripped through the fuselage. Panels exploded, the cockpit filled with smoke. Warning alarms became a deafening chorus. The right engine flamed out, the aircraft lurching into a deadly spiral. Rachel wrestled the controls, muscles screaming. "Not yet," she growled through clenched teeth. She fought the spin, forcing the nose level. Ahead, the invisible line. A friendly airspace beckoned like salvation. With one last burst of power, the aircraft staggered across the border. Suddenly, new radar pings filled the display. Friendly jets streaked in from the west, their sleek silhouettes cutting across the stars. "This is Eagle Flight. You're clear. We've got you covered." Relief crashed over the crew like a wave. The pursuing enemy fighters peeled away, unwilling to violate international airspace. Rachel slumped in her seat, lungs burning, arms trembling from the effort. The generals sank back into their seats, eyes shining with something more than exhaustion gratitude. Lopez let out a wild laugh, slapping Nguyen's shoulder. Jackson leaned back, exhaling slowly. Rachel kept her eyes forward, steadying the damaged craft. They weren't on the ground yet, but for the first time in hours, survival felt real. She whispered under her breath, almost a prayer, "We made it." The crippled aircraft touched down on the runway with a bone-rattling screech, sparks flying as the damaged landing gear groaned under the weight. Rachel's knuckles were white around the controls, her focus locked on keeping the jet steady. The runway lights blurred through the smoke, trailing behind them, and for a terrifying moment, the wheels threatened to give out entirely. Then, with one last jarring lurch, the aircraft screeched to a stop. Silence followed, broken only by the faint hiss of cooling metal. Rachel let her head fall back against the seat, every nerve in her body trembling from exhaustion. She wanted to close her eyes, to disappear into sleep, but she knew it wasn't over. The doors hissed open, medics rushing inside to check the generals first, then the crew. General Lopez was the first out, his uniform stained, his face pale, yet resolute. He refused the stretcher, standing tall despite the exhaustion. Nguyen and Jackson stumbled out next, each helping the other, their faces streaked with soot. Finally, Rachel unbuckled her harness and stood, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. She climbed down the ladder into the floodlights waiting below. A wave of personnel surrounded them, security, medics, officers all speaking at once, but the crowd parted suddenly as a group of high-ranking officials strode forward. Among them was General Marcus Reeves, the commanding officer of the operation. His expression was stern, unreadable, but his eyes never left Rachel as she stepped forward. "Lieutenant," Reeves said, his voice carrying across the tarmac. "You brought them back." Rachel stood at attention, her uniform torn and stained, her body aching. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat was raw, choked with emotions she couldn't express. Instead, she gave a sharp salute. Reeves returned it, his eyes softening just slightly. "We'll debrief soon. For now, you've earned rest." But rest wouldn't come easily. Hours later, after medics cleared her and the crew of serious injury, Rachel found herself in a stark debriefing room. The walls were blank, the table cold steel. Around it sat Reeves, Lopez, the rescued general, and two other officials. Jackson and Nguyen sat nearby, looking as battered as she felt. Reeves leaned forward. "We need a full account. From the moment of extraction until you crossed the border." Rachel recounted everything. The ambush at the safe house, the firefight in the valley, the desperate flight to the extraction point, and finally the insane aerial maneuvers that carried them across the border. Her voice was steady, but inside she relived every second, the screams, the smoke, the sheer terror. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Lopez broke it first, his voice calm but heavy with conviction. "Gentlemen, what you've just heard is not reckless behavior. It is skill, courage, and loyalty under fire. Without her, we'd be corpses behind enemy lines." The older general beside him, the one Rachel had saved in the canyon, nodded firmly. "Agreed. She risked everything, not for glory, but because she refused to leave us behind. That deserves more than a reprimand." Reeves' gaze lingered on Rachel. She felt it weigh on her shoulders, the judgment of a man who had once grounded her for risky maneuvers. Now those same instincts had saved his peers. Finally, he spoke. "Lieutenant Rachel Hunter, effective immediately, your grounding is rescinded. You will return to active flight status. Furthermore," he paused, his voice steady, You are being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross." Rachel blinked, stunned. The words hung in the air, almost unreal. She glanced at Jackson and Nevin, both grinning through exhaustion. "I only did what I had to," Rachel said quietly. Reeves' eyes softened. "And that's exactly why you deserve it." The debrief ended with paperwork, signatures, and more questions, but the heaviness in Rachel's chest had lifted. For the first time in months, the shadow of disgrace had been burned away. She wasn't just the reckless pilot anymore. She was the one who brought them home in the days that followed. The story spread through the base like wildfire. Pilots who once avoided her now nodded with respect. Ground crews whispered her name as she walked past. Even the skeptics who had mocked her risk-taking had no choice but to admit the truth. She was the reason. 2 generals were alive. The official ceremony came a week later. The hangar was packed with uniformed personnel, rows upon rows, standing at attention. The American flag hung massive behind the stage, its colors illuminated by spotlights. Rachel stood in her dress blues, freshly pressed, but still tight across. Her shoulders from the weight of memory. General Reeves took the podium. His voice was calm, measured, but every word carried. "Courage under fire defines our service. Tonight, we honor an officer who demonstrated not only courage, but selflessness, resilience, and extraordinary skill. Lieutenant Rachel Hunter did not just fly a mission. She carried the weight of lives, of the mission itself, and refused to fail. For that, she receives the Distinguished Flying Cross." Rachel stepped forward. The medal was pinned to her uniform, heavy yet humbling. Applause thundered across the hangar, but her eyes searched for one thing. In the crowd, she saw Jackson and Nguyen standing tall, both clapping harder than anyone. Beyond them, Lopez and the older general met her gaze and nodded, pride written plainly on their faces. She saluted, then stepped back, her heart pounding not from nerves, but from something deeper. Redemption wasn't in the medal itself, but in the acknowledgement that she had proven herself, not just as a pilot, but as someone who would never abandon her crew, no matter the cost. That night, as the hangar emptied and the crowd dispersed, Rachel found herself outside under the open sky. The stars stretched endlessly overhead, the same stars she had chased and fought beneath. Jackson walked up beside her, hands in his pockets. "You know," he said with a grin, "you're going to have a hard time living this one down. People are going to expect miracles every time you get in a cockpit." Rachel chuckled, shaking her head. "They can expect what they want. I'll just keep flying the way I know how." Nguyen joined them, holding 3 cups of steaming coffee. "To surviving the impossible," he said, raising one. Rachel accepted hers, raising it high. "And to never leaving anyone behind." They drank in silence, the weight of everything finally easing. The night air was cool, the world quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel felt at peace. Far above, a plane crossed the sky, its blinking lights carving through the dark. Rachel followed it with her eyes, her chest swelling with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Whatever came next, she knew she would face it head on. Not as the grounded pilot who had once been doubted, but as the one who flew through fire and brought her people home. And for Rachel Hunter, that was enough.